There's a moment in life that I know so many of you in the room dread, but you can't get away from it. And it happens, regularly, I would think. That moment where you've gone out to dinner and you went to a place and you went with some friends or maybe you went with some family, but you're sitting at the table and maybe you ordered appetizers, and maybe the appetizers got there in time, like well before your main food, your entree, and so that was good. And the appetizer was good and the food was good. And the lady or the guy has come, waiter or waitress has come over, and they're like, hey, did you save room for dessert? And of course the answer is no. Like, no, you just stuff. And sometimes it's yes, but that's rare, so at least, I don't know, it's rare. Usually dessert plans are later in my mind, but not attached to dinner. But either way, you say no, and then comes the most dreaded part for so many of you. They look at you, or maybe they look at the other people and they say, how are we splitting up the checks? And you dread this moment. You dread it because you're like, what do I say? Do I say, no, put it on one, or no, let's keep them separate. There's gonna be three of us, or I don't know. You're dreading having to make a decision in the moment. And maybe sometimes you even avoid going out to eat because of it. And you realize that you are guilty of one of a couple things. You realize that you are what we like to call the T-Rex arm check taker. That when the check is put on the table, suddenly your arms, which will fully extend to get appetizers in the middle of the table, have become like T-Rex. You can't quite reach it, you know what I'm saying? And you're slow, you're like, oh, there's the check. And you're like, oh man, you don't have to do that. And suddenly you got this really long draw. Or maybe you're the guy that when the check comes, you're like, you know what, I gotta use the restroom. All of a sudden the commitment to financial decisions has created bladder issues. And you're like, I gotta go. And then when you come back, you walk up and oh, did you take care of that already? No, you should. I was gonna get it this time. And that's the kind of person that you are right now, Some of you are feeling guilty about it. That's not what the message is about, by the way. I'm just getting there. My favorite to watch, and this is really fun when you're at the table next to the families that are going through this. When you got two patriarchs at the table, usually it's dads that are a little older or grandfathers, and they already know they are not trying to get out of paying the check. They are ensuring that the check comes to them and them alone, that it's a matter of pride that they will be paying the bill, that they shall not let someone else pick up the check. And so they're not waiting. There's no T-Rex arms. The moment that check touches the table, it's what's that show where they hit the button with Steve Harvey? You know what I'm saying? Family Feud, they're hitting the button. They're trying to grab the check as quick as they can. Or some of them are real sneaky, and they get up to use the restroom at some point, and they pull the waitress aside. I'm like, hey, listen, I'm just telling you, if you know what's good for you, that check will come to me and no one else. You understand? If you want to go home tonight, you will not give that check to the other guy sitting at my table. For the last 3 weeks, we've been looking at a dinner that Jesus attended. And if you've been with us for the last couple of weeks, you know the bill comes due and Jesus does not hesitate. It is so evident when we read the story we've been in the last 2 weeks that Jesus has every intention and every desire to pick up the bill. If it's your first week in the series with us, let me give you a quick recap. There's a religious leader, his name is Simon. He's a Pharisee. It's a title. It's a position that you could hold in the Jewish religion. And he's a Pharisee, so he's a leader. People look up to him. He's very devoted to his faith. He's very knowledgeable about his faith. And guys in his kind of stratosphere are typically a little more well-to-do in the first century Judaism and in around Jerusalem. And so they would have these houses, and they were typically larger than everyone else's house, and they would have a courtyard of sorts where it was a private courtyard. It belonged to them, but when they would host dinner guests, they would host them in the courtyard. And it was large enough that when other people from the street or just from the city, they were welcome to come into that courtyard and stand along the walls and listen to the dinner conversation. These conversations were between a Pharisee like Simon himself and typically someone that has a pretty good reputation, a traveling teacher or rabbi. In this case, it was Jesus. He invited Jesus to come to dinner. And so people would hear that Jesus, this kind of up and coming rabbi in the first century, that had really kind of started sharing some things that was making people really think about God. That as he was this up and comer, when he was invited to Simon's house, people would want to hear the interaction. They don't have to wish to be a fly on the wall in that room. They actually got to stand on the wall in that room and listen. Now, they weren't allowed to talk. They couldn't interject, but they could just listen to the conversation. And it was a wealth of knowledge that they would gain by listening to two religious leaders talk or two leaders talk back and forth. And so Jesus is invited to this dinner. The third person that we read about that comes to the dinner is not invited. We have Simon the Pharisee, the religious leader. We have Jesus, this rabbi who's starting to make waves with the way he teaches and interacts with people. And then we have a third person that shows up to the dinner. This individual is not invited, but she is there to stand on the wall and listen to the conversation. We do not get her name. We simply get a description of the woman. In Luke 7:37, it says this: a woman in that town who had lived a sinful life. Now, when we begin to look into the specifics that all of that kind of creates, that Luke creates for us as he writes this particular book, this chronicle of the life of Jesus and his teachings, we come to realize that Luke likes to use this language when describing a woman who is in prostitution or in sex work. And so when he describes her that way, everyone knows, and the kind of the hints are, she's known around the town for her sin. Everyone is aware. People don't use her name. They know what she does. And that's the way that she's described in this particular dinner. She comes into the room or the courtyard where dinner is taking place. Jesus is reclined at the table. Reclined for us typically means feet up and out. For them in the first century, it means that they're on their stomach or typically their side, honestly on their left side, and they would be reclined with their head at the table. Which means that the table is not a standard table like we would sit at. This table is very close to the floor. And so their head would be towards the table. They would be leaning on their left elbow. They would be eating with their right hand. Their feet would be out away from the table. And they would recline and they would spend the evening with each other having conversations that feel very relaxed, and they would enjoy one another's company. Well, this woman, when she walks in, she goes to the feet of Jesus. So she finds a place up against the wall, and Jesus is reclined on the floor, his head over there, his feet right here. And when she gets close to Jesus, she has this natural reaction that takes place. She begins to weep. And she cries so hard, so much, that her tears begin to wet the feet of Jesus. And when this takes place, Jesus doesn't recoil. Jesus doesn't move his feet. Jesus doesn't say, "Excuse me, ma'am, do you need a tissue?" He doesn't look at her and say, "Hey, this is not the time or the place," or "Hey, get yourself together and then come back." He doesn't say any of that. He just allows her to wet his feet with her tears. Simon is watching this take place. He sees her walk in. He sees her take her place. Undoubtedly, the reason that Simon and guys like him would have these courtyards and create these public moments for people to listen in on these great conversations is because it elevated his own status in the community. As people would come and listen, they would realize that, oh, what a great, maybe semi-famous guy or even really famous guy would host or would be hosted at Simon's house, that they accepted his invitation, that elevated who Simon was in their eyes. And so I can't imagine what Simon's thinking when this woman comes in. Like, hey, of all the people that I want my status to be elevated in front of, it's not her. She's not the person I wanted to impress, but she's taking up a space on my wall. And then when she begins to cry, I can only imagine what he's thinking. What are you doing crying on my guest's feet? And then she bends down on her knees and she takes the covering off her hair. She takes her hair from the back and she pulls it in front of her shoulder and she bends down and begins to wipe the tears off of Jesus' feet with her hair. And then as she is so close to the feet of Jesus, she begins to kiss his feet. And then she remembers she has a jar, an alabaster jar of perfume that she has around her neck, worth a ton of money. And she breaks it open and she pours it out on the feet of Jesus. And the entire time this is taking place, Jesus simply stays still. He gives her permission by permitting her. He gives her permission by engaging with her. He gives her permission by not shying away or moving or even flinching. Jesus simply allows her to worship. And Simon watches this take place. As this is happening, Simon says something to himself. He doesn't say it out loud. He doesn't mumble it under his breath. The original language tells us it's an inward thought. This is what's recorded in Luke 7:39. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, talking about the woman with Jesus, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who was touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. So we're going to take a look at this passage. We're just going to leave it up for a few moments. There's a few things that we want to point out. The first thing is the word if. So Simon has invited Jesus. He is absolutely sure that he's an up-and-comer. He is sure that his popularity is rising. He's also sure that if Jesus accepts the invite and shows up at his house, it does something for his own status. He knows those things. What he doesn't know is just how significant Jesus is, and the first hint we have at that is he says, if this guy was a prophet, he would know the kind of person that's touching her or touching him. And so immediately we have an idea, we get some insight that Simon isn't on board with the significance of Jesus yet. He might be exploring, or maybe he's coming to a conclusion in this moment where he uses the word, if he actually was a prophet, he would know what's taking place. He would know who's engaging with him. The second thing that we learn from this is that he uses the word prophet. He says, if he was a prophet. In other words, for Simon, the highest Jesus could be, would be prophet. In his world, best case scenario, Jesus is a prophet. And so he's thinking, if this guy is as special as everybody thinks he is, the label we're gonna give him is prophet. And so even if Jesus shows what Simon is looking for, maybe it's contempt towards the woman who's lived a sinful life and has known about it. Even if he does that, the best Jesus is going to do for Simon is, okay, so you're a prophet. Simon doesn't understand who's reclined with him at the table. We also see that when Simon says this, he says it to himself. He doesn't say it out loud. This is internal religion that's starting to happen inside of himself. And I would think if we were to stop for a moment, we would begin to realize that this is where we can identify with Simon most. You see, some of us never get to the place where we say what we're thinking out loud. Our filter is decent, and our filter works. But it doesn't change that that's what we think. It doesn't change that that's actually how we feel about individuals. The religion that's turning inside of us, even though we don't say it out loud, doesn't make it any less true about what we actually believe. And Simon is wrestling with that in this very moment. Unfortunately for Simon, or maybe fortunately, depends on how you see it, he happens to be in a room with the guy that helped create him. And so when he thinks it to himself, the Son of God can hear what maybe he thought no one could hear. The last thing that we realize in this small passage of verse 39 is the way that Simon refers to her. He says he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Simon decided that it was best for everyone in the room, including himself, to be reminded that she is not known by her name, but she's known for and by her sin. So much so that he labels her as simply a sinner. You see, when grace isn't part of our worldview, compassion for people is replaced by labels for people. And that creates a problem for us because it dehumanizes people. They just become the non-human label for us. He just writes her off as this woman who's a sinner. He should know who's touching him, this sinner. Maybe the way that we should approach it is we would want to ask a question like, I don't know, what's your name? And maybe she gives her name. Maybe her name is Samantha. And then we have some follow-up questions because it's obvious to everyone what she's going through and what she engages in. And so maybe we ask the question, Samantha, obviously people don't typically make this choice for their life in the sex industry. How did you get here? What happened? Why is this where you ended up with how you provide for yourself? And then Samantha would have an opportunity to share a story. And maybe her husband died and she had no other options. Or maybe her husband traded her in for a younger model and she still had no other options. Or who knows what the cause was. But either way, we begin to realize that there's a human experience behind even poor decisions. And it brings us to a place to understand how grace works in someone's life as opposed to simply writing them off with a label. That we would engage with them to understand a name and a story. Even if the story doesn't add up in terms of that's the best decision you could have made, it still gives us insight to the human experience of struggle. And that struggle then allows us to understand just how incredible grace is. Simon wasn't there. Simon was in a place where he understood that Jesus had a reputation, and that reputation was to be a holy man. That holiness would be something that Jesus would be described with. And he understood that she would be described as a sinner. And so when she looked at the two getting close to one another, his immediate thought was his sinfulness or her sinfulness is going to impact negatively his holiness. That's what he's saying. Because he realizes, he's hoping Jesus realizes, you are making yourself unclean by permitting her to touch you. This is not gonna go well for you, Rabbi, is what he's thinking. Because he's in that mindset. What she brings to the table is gonna muck up who Jesus is. And what he doesn't realize is that the holiness of Jesus is actually gonna have more of an impact on her sinfulness than her sinfulness is gonna have on his holiness. Which makes sense when we're trying to bring our friends to Jesus and not to us. Jesus hears Simon's thoughts. And in verse 40, it says, Jesus answered him. So Simon hears this, or says this internally, and Jesus hears him, and Jesus answers his thoughts and says, Simon, I have something to tell you. To which Simon says, tell me, teacher. So now Simon is thinking, this guy isn't who everybody thinks he is. If he was, he would know just how dirty this girl is. And immediately Jesus hears his thoughts, responds, and says, I got something to tell you. Simon doesn't say out loud what he's thinking. He simply responds and he's like, oh, tell me, teacher. Like, hey, you know so much, teach me something. This is the moment Simon was waiting for. This is the conversation that's gonna show everyone just how deep theologians they are. Maybe they're gonna talk about something really great, or maybe he's gonna share something with Simon that the people around the room standing on the walls, they will be elevated, or his reputation will be elevated because of the conversation they're about to have. And so he looks at Jesus and is like, yeah, tell me, teacher. Whatever you wanna say, tell me, teacher. And so Jesus begins to share with him a story. He says, there's a guy, and he's lent out a bunch of money. To one guy, he's lent out 500 denarii, or 500 days' wages. So like working every single day for like a year and a half, all of that money, that's what this one guy owes. Same guy lent out 50 denarii to someone else, so 50 days' wages to someone else. And both of them, the 500 days' wages guy and the 50 days' wages guy, it's due. Neither of them can pay. Neither of them can pay their debt. And so the guy who's owed all the money, he decides, you know what? Your debts are forgiven. You don't have to pay. 500, forget about it. 50, don't ever mention it again. It's taken care of, it's done. And so Jesus then looks at Simon and says, all right, so now tell me, who loves the guy more? The one who was forgiven 500 or the guy who was forgiven 50? Who's gonna love the lender more for forgiving their debts, the 500 debt or the 50 debt? And so Simon, he's like, I know how to answer this. Simon's a religious leader. He's asked a question by another religious leader, another teacher. He doesn't want to give the wrong answer. There's a little pressure building in the room, but Simon feels confident. He looks at Jesus and said, well, surely the guy who was forgiven 500. And Jesus responds, you have judged correctly. And Simon is feeling good about himself because now he's like, oh, there's a riddle and I just solved the riddle, right? He's feeling pretty good. You asked me a question, I gave you an answer, you confirmed my answer is correct. Simon does not see coming what happens next. Jesus is looking at Simon, having a conversation, telling him a story, asking him a question. Simon's response, they're still making eye contact. But then, the Bible says he turns toward the woman and tells Simon something. He turned towards the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. So Jesus turns away from Simon, looks at the woman, and still begins to talk to Simon and says, do you see this woman? To which Simon, of course, saw her. Of course he saw her. Of course, who didn't see the woman? As soon as she walked in, everybody was like, oh no. Of all the people, she's the one, like if we had put a list together of who's showing up to this dinner to listen, she's not on the list, right? She's not on the list. And so when she walks in, everyone sees her. Simon, for sure, saw her. Simon didn't just see her, he labeled her. He knows about her. Jesus asks, do you see this woman? But he's not asking, did you see her with your eyes? Is he? Do you see this woman? You see, Simon had seen everything. This is what Simon saw. People were getting things ready for the dinner. He was excited. Jesus was in town. He made sure that the dinner was appropriate for having a teacher or a rabbi over. He probably had conversations with the folks that serve in his house and made sure that everything was just so. As time came for Jesus to arrive, he made his way into the courtyard and waited for Jesus to get there. And Jesus shows up, and so do others. And Jesus has found himself at the table, reclined, and he's thinking to himself, this is exactly what I'd hoped for. This is why I invited Jesus over. And out of the corner of his eye, he sees the woman walk in who's not supposed to be there, and his heart beats a little fast, and he's like, no, not this one. Like I have limited space on my walls, and I need them to be people who elevate my status. I don't need you here. But she goes over immediately to the feet of Jesus and stands behind them. And I'm sure Simon is thinking, of course, she's going to go stand close to Jesus. It's like paparazzi. They just can't get enough when somebody comes to town. And I'm going to position myself, not just in a place where maybe I'm a little less conspicuous, maybe in the corner or in the shadows. She goes directly to where everyone's eyes will be all evening, every time Jesus speaks, right at his feet against the wall. And then she begins to cry, and Simon sees her crying, and I'm sure he's thinking, good grief, woman, get it together. He's just a teacher. Not a prophet, obviously. And then she uncovers her hair, and he can't say anything, not because he doesn't want to, but because he doesn't know how to say. He's probably thinking, goodness, if I say too much, will they think that I know her? Like, know her? She takes her hair down. He thinks disgusting. He begins to watch her kiss his feet. He thinks, okay, woman, you're a little over the top. She breaks a jar of perfume and pours it on his feet, and he thinks, woman, you got a lot to learn. And then Jesus turns to him as he's processing and tells him a riddle and asks him a question. And he thinks hard about it, and he gives what he believes to be the right answer. And Jesus, in front of everyone, confirms he has judged correctly. And that feels good for Simon. It feels good to know that another religious leader has commented on how you judge correctly. That's a good day. But then Jesus asks a really interesting question. Do I see this woman? And that's when Jesus takes a moment to tell Simon what actually happened in the room. You see, Simon had been in the room the whole time, and he had seen what had taken place. He just had only seen his version of what took place. Jesus is going to take a moment in the next 3 verses and give him every detail of what actually happened in the room. Do you see this woman? I came into your house, and you did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. It was standard practice in the first century that when you had guests over, that you would have someone attending the door, and when they walked in, you would provide a basin of water and an opportunity for them to clean their feet off. The roads were dirty and dusty, and so this was just normal. It's the equivalent of if you invite someone over to your house and it's been raining or maybe it's been really cold outside, and when they get there and they've got jackets on, what do? You take their jackets from them. If you're really fancy, you have a coat closet. We haven't grown up in our house to have a coat closet, so we take ours to our bedroom and put it on the bed, and we shut the bedroom door. That's what we do, you know what I'm saying? Some of you got a little more opportunities and options. I'm telling you, you could turn that coat closet into more, but practical storage. Just use the bed. It works fine. Close the door. Nobody knows. You know what I'm saying? They feel like it's fancy, but it ain't. It's just on the bed. But that's the equivalent of what they're talking about. It's just taking someone's jacket when they get there if they've been raining or it's freezing outside. That's all it is. It's nothing special. It's not over the top. It's just, this is normal things when someone shows up to your house in the first century. And Jesus says, you didn't do this, Simon. And so she wet my feet with her tears. And typically they would have a towel after you had the opportunity to wash your feet, and they would dry your feet off for you. And said, you didn't even provide a towel, so she used her hair, Simon. I know you think you know what has been going on in your house, but I'm about to give you a very detailed explanation of everything that's taken place in your house. Verse 45, you did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. First century Judaism, this is standard practice. This is not exceptional. This is not special. When you were to walk into someone's presence, you would exchange kisses with them. You know, not like kissy kiss, you know, like that kind of kissing, you know what I'm saying? Like just like the French do, not like a French kiss, you know what I'm saying? The cheek kiss, you know what I'm saying? Like it just be a greeting. That's the way they did it. And that was not out of the ordinary. That was not like over the top. That was just shaking hands when you walk into another man's room. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey man, it's great to have that. That's it. That's what the equivalent was. And Jesus looks at the guy and he's like, bro, you didn't even greet me when I got to your house with the most standard of greeting. Yet she can't stop kissing my feet since we got here. Verse 46, you did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Now, anointing someone's head with oil when they came to your house, that is over the top. That is like a way to honor, like big time. Like yeah, you're definitely a prophet. In fact, you're probably more important than a prophet, right? Like that's a big deal for a Pharisee to anoint someone's head. Big deal. And so Jesus just lays it out. He's like, you didn't do that either. And Jesus is letting him know, I know you have no idea who I actually am. But she does. She does. But she didn't anoint my head. She took the most costly possession she had and she broke open the jar, which is a one-time use thing. And she poured it all out, not on my head, which is where you typically would anoint someone. She went to my feet because she's starting to realize just who I really am. She wouldn't dare to approach the head of Jesus. She's still stuck at, I'm not worthy to even get beyond your feet. Simon thought he knew what had happened in his house. And Jesus brings to light what actually happened in his house. And so Jesus then concludes, therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Jesus doesn't deny that she's got a bunch of sins. He says it out loud. He says it, therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven. Maybe now we're putting it together. Maybe now we're like, oh, okay, let's put it all together. The story Jesus tells about the 500 denarii guy in debt, that's the woman. And the 50 denarii guy, that's the one. That's Simon, right? He's like, oh, that's me. Okay, yeah. And we're putting it together. Oh, now we understand what Jesus is saying. She's got a bunch of sins, like 500 days worth of wages of sins. And Simon's, it ain't that much. It's just 50. And when we look at the world that way and we ask the question, who's going to love more? Simon answers the way it makes sense to answer. Well, the person who was forgiven the larger debt. And Jesus says, and you've judged correctly. And if that's what we think is happening here, we too are incorrect. Jesus tells them, whoever has been forgiven little loves little. And we go to that mindset. Simon must have been forgiven little. That's why this makes sense. And that's where we go wrong. Here's the point. Who in this room has been forgiven little. Let's go beyond here. Who in any room, anywhere on the planet has only been forgiven little? The answer, whether it makes you uncomfortable or not, is nobody. Nobody qualifies as forgiven little. We are all forgiven much. In fact, there are probably things in our life that we don't even realize would qualify or be categorized as sin. There are things that's happening in our world that we might think, oh no, this is not a big deal. And God's like, that's a big deal. There's none of us that qualify as I'm in the room. I'm on the list of people that's I've only had to been forgiven just a little bit. Just a little bit, you know. That's it. A wee little bit. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. But for Simon, there was. For Simon, he was like, yeah, I got just a few things. When kids come and have a conversation with me about giving their life to Jesus, one of the exercises I kind of walk them through, I'll draw a box on a blank piece of paper. And I'll say, hey, this box, it represents your whole life. Everything inside the box, okay? It represents your whole life. And I'll say, let's talk about sin for a second. Do you know what sin is? And they'll say, yeah, it's when you do something wrong, you know, something God doesn't like. Like, yeah, okay, we're on the same page. And so I'll ask them, I'll say, hey, tell me like the worst sin you can think of. Like what's the absolute worst, most horrible thing anybody could ever do? And a lot of times it'll be things like hitting my brother or taking my brother's donut or something like that. Like that in their mind, that's what it is, you know? And so I'll go, well, let's think about something like maybe even worse. Like, what about killing someone? Like, what if we killed somebody? They're like, oh, yeah, that's way worse. Like, yeah, okay, we're on something. All right, cool. And so I take my pencil or my pen, and I'll go into the box, and I'll say, in this person's life, they killed someone. How messy does the sin need to be? We need to draw sin. And like big, and like, yeah. So it draws big, huge scribble in the box, and it'd be huge, right? And I'll say, hey, what's the teeny tiniest sin you can think of? And it's gone, wild things, you know, everything from like stepping on a flower after it's bloomed, you know, to all kind of stuff. And say, oh, that's a good one, right? Okay, I'm not actually sure if that's a sin or not, but they're going to go with it, you know what I'm saying? Like, well, if it's an accident, it's not a sin. Okay, gotcha, okay, all right. And so I'll say, hey, how big of a dot does that? And they go, a little bitty dot. And so we'll have this huge, nasty murder dot, and then I'll take my pencil and go, tick, and it'll be just a little one. I say, but the reality is, nobody just sins like twice, right? So there's like this really big, nasty sin, and this little, I stepped on a flower, and there's probably some others in between. And so I'll start dotting it all up. I'm like, man, there's a bunch of sin, right? And I said, all right, so that's one guy, okay? Now draw another box. And I'll say, hey, let's just pretend that this person, they only sinned one time their whole life. And it was just they stepped on the flower. And so I'll take a dot and I'll put a teeny tiny little dot in the box. And so I got both boxes next to each other. One is just all scribbled up, and the other one's got this itty bitty little dot. And I'll tell them, I'll say, look, obviously, I don't know about you, but I've never killed anyone. Have you killed someone? And they're like, no. I'm like, great. Well, this is not us then. This is not us, right? Which of these two get to go to heaven and be with Jesus forever? And all the time, they say, the one with the little dot. Which gives me an awesome opportunity to draw a third box. And I draw the third box, and I say, the truth is, the only people that get to live with Jesus forever are people who have boxes that are completely clean. Even the smallest dot disqualifies you from Jesus. Doesn't matter if your box is slam full or just the teeny tiniest dot. Both are equally disqualified to live with Jesus forever. And the thing is, the only way to clean up the single dot or the entire mess is Jesus. And Jesus gives both the box that's full and the box with the teeny dot the same opportunity to trust him with a thing that he gives called grace. And grace is the only thing that does something about what's in the box. People might say there's other ways. There's nothing that cleans that box but the grace of Jesus. Nothing. You can't give enough to the poor. You can't volunteer enough at a soup kitchen. You can't donate your property. You can't do any of those things. You can't mount up enough serving hours. There's no such thing. There's nothing you can do that cleans the box except for allow Jesus to do some cleaning with grace. That's it. That's the only answer. For Simon's in the place of, well, at least my box ain't as full as hers. And Jesus is looking at him and says, bro, you can't pay it even if your box wasn't as full as hers. Their sin might have been very different, but their bankruptcy was identical. You know, I made an ask 2 Sundays ago that we would read this passage every day individually for 2 weeks. And I know that for those of you who gave it a shot, there was probably moments when you were like, this is hard to read the same thing every day for 2 weeks. But I thought it appropriate that we would close today by reading it one last time together. So this is what I want to do. I'm going to read it in its entirety out loud, and we're going to put it on the screen. You're going to see sections of the passage that are underlined. When we get to that underlined section, I would like for all of you to read that with me out loud. So none of the screens will start with an underline. There'll always be at least a line to get into it. But I think it would do some good for us to read it together, since we've all been reading it separately. And then for a few key moments, to say it out loud with each other. Let's read together Luke chapter 7, 36 through 50, and you'll read out loud the underlined sections. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who had lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who was touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. He owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly," Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." My hope over the last couple of weeks, or even if you're joining us for the first time today, is that you are asking yourself this simple question: who am I in the story? Are you Simon, who sees things through a lens that his own world has created? Who sees Jesus through a lens his own world has created? Sees the woman through a lens his own world has created? Are you Jesus? Do you have a compassion that goes beyond labels? One that desires to get to know the human story behind struggle, and who seeks and wants and hopes and drives for the best in people? Are you the woman, fully aware of just how broken your life has been and how in need of a Savior you are? But if you notice, there's a fourth person in the room. We read what they said together. It was at the end of verse 49. The other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sin?" And maybe there are some of you in the room who are the fourth person in the room. And you are asking yourself, who is this Jesus that can do something new, make something new out of what I have brought that's broken? Who is this Jesus really that knows my reputation and knows what I'm known for, if not publicly, privately, and still has a promise for a future and purpose? Who looks on all of my sin, would even call it many sins, and say, "I forgive every single one of them." And maybe you're here asking, who is this guy? It would be my honor. It would be any of the followers of Jesus in this room's honor to introduce you to him. His name is Jesus, and he has a seat for you at the table. Followers of Jesus, we really only have two options if we get down to it. We're either going to be Simon or the woman. And for where I stand, the best in this story is the woman. I never want to be Simon.